Alexander Montgomery, a powerful businessman, never expected a simple walk in the park to unravel his life. When a homeless woman named Lena offers to sketch his portrait, her raw talent and quiet intensity draw him in. But it's the mystery behind her that ignites his curiosity. Intrigued by her hidden depth, Alexander embarks on a journey to learn more about the artist, only to uncover startling secrets that blur the line between fame and deception. What starts as a chance encounter soon spirals into a story of rediscovery, revealing connections neither of them ever anticipated. The shocking truth behind Lena's identity will challenge everything Alexander thought he knew about art, success, and his own heart, leading them both to confront the past in ways they never imagined. Welcome to Limelight Tales. One portrait, one encounter. What happens when a powerful businessman discovers the shocking truth behind a mysterious artist's past? It was a cold morning, the kind of winter chill that nipped at the skin and made the world feel just a little bit smaller. Alexander Montgomery, a businessman in his early 40s, was out for his daily walk, a habit he had maintained for years. The sprawling city park, usually a place for joggers and families, felt almost deserted at this hour. His suit was sharp, his expression sharper, as his mind, ever at work, churned over the details of the upcoming merger. But even the sharpest mind needed a moment of respite, or so he told himself, as he adjusted the collar of his coat. He walked past the usual spots, the large oak tree, the fountain surrounded by benches, and the worn path that curved along the lake. But something caught his eye that morning. Something unusual. At the far edge of the park, beneath the shadow of a large willow tree, sat a woman. She was hunched over, sketching on a pad, her presence almost ethereal against the morning fog. Her clothes were worn, frayed at the edges, but her hands moved with a quiet precision that made her seem out of place in such an environment. Intrigued, Alexander slowed his pace, his steps nearly faltering. She was a homeless woman, her hair tangled and wild, but there was something about the way she held herself, an understated elegance in the chaos of her life. As he watched her, she looked up, her piercing green eyes meeting his for a moment. A flicker of recognition passed between them, though neither of them had ever met before. "Would you like a portrait?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, as though she had been waiting for him to stop. There was no hint of desperation in her tone, only an odd calmness, as if she were offering him something precious. He hesitated. Portraits weren't something he normally entertained, especially from someone in her position, but something about the moment, something intangible, made him curious. "Why not?" he said, almost to himself, stepping closer. "How much?" She smiled, the gesture not one of greed but of something deeper, perhaps understanding or a recognition of an unspoken need. "Whatever you feel it's worth." Alexander sat on the nearby bench, a bit stiff, the weight of his designer suit making him feel out of place. Lena, as he would later learn her name to be, did not rush. She simply took out her worn charcoal and began sketching, her eyes never leaving him for long. He thought it strange that she wasn't trying to make small talk, but it didn't bother him. In fact, it felt refreshing. She focused solely on the task at hand, her hand moving swiftly across the paper, capturing his features with surprising accuracy. The minutes passed, and Alexander found himself oddly entranced by the process. The world around him seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in that quiet, gray moment. He hadn't realized how much he had missed genuine silence, the kind that wasn't filled with boardroom chatter or the hum of constant notifications. "Pardon." There was something oddly intimate about the way Lena's gaze occasionally flicked up to meet his, as though she were not merely drawing a portrait, but searching for something deeper. Her eyes, though weathered by life, held an understanding he couldn't quite place. As the portrait neared completion, Alexander couldn't help but feel the strange stirrings of emotion deep within him. It was as if the woman had uncovered something about him he hadn't realized was there. He couldn't pinpoint what it was. Perhaps it was the vulnerability in the way she captured his features, or the tenderness of her movements. But there was a connection between them, however fleeting, that left him unsettled. When she finished, she held up the sketch to him, her hands trembling slightly. "It's done," she said simply. Alexander took the portrait, his breath catching in his throat as he gazed at the drawing. It was him, yes, but it was more than that. His expression was soft, not the cold, controlled face he wore for the outside world. The artist had captured something more, a trace of sadness, a flicker of longing in his eyes, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The image seemed to peer into the depths of his soul, reflecting parts of him he had long since buried. "That's incredible," he muttered, his voice unsteady. Lena gave a small, knowing smile, but said nothing. She simply placed the sketch into his hands and stood, brushing the dirt from her knees. "There's more to you than meets the eye," she said, her voice quieter now, but still with that strange, almost otherworldly calm. Alexander was left standing there, holding the portrait, his mind reeling. He didn't know why, but the encounter had stirred something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He looked down at the drawing again, his fingers tracing the edges of the charcoal lines. He could almost feel her eyes on him even after she had walked away. For the first time in what felt like ages, he allowed himself to be lost in thought. What had just happened? Who was she really? Why did it feel like she knew him better than anyone had in years? For the next few days, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling of the encounter with Lena. The portrait stayed on his desk, its presence quietly unsettling him as he worked, its haunting accuracy making him question himself more than he cared to admit. He tried to push the feeling away, focusing on his responsibilities and the upcoming board meeting. But there was a constant nagging thought in the back of his mind. Something about Lena, about the way she had looked at him, had left a mark. Late one evening, after another grueling day at the office, Alexander found himself walking again through the same park, his feet almost automatically carrying him toward the willow tree where he had met her. The world seemed quieter this time, the streets far emptier, as the city's hustle and bustle gave way to a peaceful stillness. He reached the spot and paused, scanning the area for any sign of her. There was nothing. The park was as empty as it had been before, except for a few stray leaves caught in the breeze. His chest tightened as he stood there, disappointment settling over him like a heavy cloak. She had been an enigma, an unexpected spark of connection in his carefully controlled life. And now, she was gone. Just another fleeting moment that would fade away, like so many others before it. Turning to leave, he noticed something at the base of the tree, a small envelope half buried beneath a pile of fallen leaves. Curiosity piqued. He bent down and retrieved it. It was simple, unmarked, with no return address. But inside was a letter, written in a delicate, almost elegant script. He unfolded it carefully. "I didn't want to leave you with only a portrait. Nari." The letter was brief, but it was enough to send a ripple of emotion through Alexander. The words felt personal, as if she had known the effect her art had on him, as if she had intentionally stirred something he'd long ignored. But what could she have meant by not wanting to leave him with only a portrait? He read on. "You may not remember me, but I remember you. I remember your face, your sadness. I remember the last time you let someone in. There's so much more to you than what you show the world. Don't let it stay hidden. I hope you find your way." The last line struck him hardest. There was an intensity to it, a rawness that felt like a call to action. He couldn't deny the truth in her words, though they stung. He had buried his emotions long ago, tucked them neatly away beneath layers of business deals and success. His life had become a series of transactions, of achievements, devoid of the vulnerability that had once allowed him to love and be loved. But Lena's portrait, and now her letter, seemed to unravel all of that, slowly pulling him back to something he thought was long gone. For a moment, Alexander simply stood there, the letter trembling slightly in his hands as the wind began to pick up. He wanted to forget, to walk away, to return to his life and pretend nothing had changed. But deep down, he knew it had. Something had shifted inside him. A door he thought was closed, now creaking open. Determined to find her, Alexander set off in search of Lena. He had no idea where to start, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just some random stranger he had met on a whim. There was something more, something that tied their lives together in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The next few days were filled with fruitless searching. He returned to the park, spoke to local shopkeepers, and asked around, but no one had seen her. The more he inquired, the more elusive she seemed. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. Just as his hope began to wane, Alexander received a call from a friend who owned a small art gallery downtown. "Alex, I've got something for you," his friend said, his voice tinged with excitement. "You remember that portrait you mentioned? The one you said was done by a homeless woman? Well, I think you might want to take a look at this." His heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I'll send you a photo. Just trust me on this. It's worth your time." Minutes later, Alexander received a photo on his phone. It was an image of an old exhibition flyer showcasing a series of art pieces from years ago. And right there, in the center, was a familiar face. The same face Lena had drawn in her portrait. The artist's name beneath the image was Lena Moreau. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. The name was one he recognized from an old art auction he had attended years ago. Lena Moreau was a once renowned artist, a prodigy whose works had fetched millions. But then, she had disappeared from the public eye without a trace. There had been whispers, rumors of scandal, betrayal, and a mysterious disappearance. But no one knew what had happened to her. Until now. Realization hit him like a jolt. Lena, the homeless artist, was no mere stranger. She was someone he had read about, someone he had admired from afar during his early years in the art world. And yet, here she was, standing before him, not as the celebrated artist the world had once known, but as a woman who had fallen off the map, hidden in plain sight. Alexander was left standing there, staring at the photo, his mind racing with questions. How had she ended up this way? And more importantly, why had she chosen to reveal herself to him now? It was no longer just a coincidence. Lena had come into his life for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was about to change everything. The search for Lena consumed Alexander in a way he hadn't expected. The more he learned about her past, the more he realized how little he truly understood about the world beyond his carefully constructed life. He dug deeper, reaching out to old contacts in the art world, tracing back to exhibitions and galleries where Lena had once been a celebrated figure. Every clue he uncovered painted a picture of a woman who had given up everything for the art she loved, only to be betrayed by those closest to her. Then, after weeks of searching, Alexander received another unexpected message. It wasn't a letter this time, but a text, a simple, direct message that only contained an address and the words, "I knew you'd come." He didn't hesitate. His heart pounded in his chest as he made his way to the address, a small, run-down apartment in a quieter part of the city. The door was slightly ajar when he arrived, and as he stepped inside, he was greeted by a sight that took his breath away. The room was filled with art, paintings, sketches, and sculptures that seemed to capture raw, unfiltered emotions. And there, standing in the middle of it all, was Lena. Her hair was no longer wild and untamed. She had a quiet grace about her now, her presence commanding but not overwhelming. She was older, worn by time and hardship, but her eyes, those same piercing green eyes, still held that deep knowing. She smiled when she saw him, a smile full of warmth, as if the last few years had never happened. "You found me," Lena said softly, her voice carrying a sense of both surprise and relief. Alexander stepped forward, holding out the portrait she had drawn of him. "I couldn't stop thinking about this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And about you. I don't understand. Why hide? Why live like this?" Lena took a deep breath, her gaze drifting to the artwork surrounding them. "I didn't choose this life willingly, but sometimes you have to disappear in order to find yourself again, to reclaim what was taken from you, even if it means losing everything. I was once consumed by the art world, by the fame, the accolades, but I lost my way along the way. I had to let go of that part of me to truly live." Alexander stood in silence, his heart heavy with understanding. He'd always prided himself on being in control, but Lena's journey, a journey of self-discovery and sacrifice, made him realize how much of his own life had been ruled by external validation. He had buried his own feelings, his own desires, for the sake of success. But now, standing before him, Lena had shown him the raw, unfiltered truth of what it meant to live authentically. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I should have known better. I should have seen the signs, seen you for who you really are." Lena's smile softened, and she stepped closer to him, placing a hand gently on his arm. "It's not about the past, Alexander. It's about what we choose now, what we choose to do with what we've learned." And for the first time in years, Alexander felt a deep sense of peace settle within him. He had spent so much time chasing the wrong things, but now, with Lena before him, he realized that everything he had truly needed, connection, understanding, love, was something that had always been within reach. He just had to let go of his fear. "I don't know what the future holds," Alexander said, his voice steady now, "but I know I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." Lena looked at him with a mix of wonder and gratitude in her eyes. "You won't. You never have." And in that moment, everything changed. Alexander knew that life wasn't about grand achievements or endless success. It was about the quiet, meaningful connections that touched your soul and made you see the world with new eyes. Lena had shown him that. She had reminded him that it was never too late to reclaim what you had lost, and that true happiness came not from what you had built, but from what you chose to build together. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between Alexander and Lena deepened. They spent time together, not just as a businessman and an artist, but as two people who had found something rare and precious in each other. Lena's art, once a means of survival, became a shared passion between them. Alexander, with his new understanding of life's true value, began to use his wealth and influence to support artists like Lena. those who had been overlooked or forgotten by the world. The final emotional twist came one afternoon when Alexander and Lena stood together in front of a gallery, Lena's first public exhibition in years. The walls were lined with her paintings, each one reflecting the emotions of a life lived with both pain and joy, struggle and triumph. And in the center of the room, her portrait of Alexander stood, larger than life. It wasn't just a portrait. It was a reflection of everything they had been through together, the pain, the healing, the rediscovery of what truly mattered. As the crowd gathered around them, Alexander took Lena's hand in his, and for the first time in a long time he felt completely at peace. The future was uncertain, but with her by his side, he knew one thing for sure. He was finally living the life he had always been meant to live. And together, they had found their way back to each other. True fulfillment comes not from success or material wealth, but from embracing the connections that awaken our truest selves. It's about shedding the layers we build to protect our egos and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable enough to see and be seen by others. In the end, it's the courage to face our past, acknowledge our regrets, and open our hearts to new possibilities that leads us to the deepest form of happiness, one that is built not on achievements, but on love, understanding, and shared moments of growth. Thank you for watching Limelight Tales. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest adventures. For your next step, take a moment today to uncover something new in your own life. You never know what hidden truths are waiting to be discovered.